So as kind of Emily just kind of set out, I'm going to do a whistle stop tour here. So it's going to be quite a kind of very quick kind of whistle through kind of some of the key things we've been doing in Greater Manchester, and particularly kind of what's the problem that we're trying to kind of solve here, what are the opportunities, and what are the potential solutions. It's safe to say that we're not kind of got everything completely covered here in terms of the complete jigsaw, but it's just to give you a bit of a snapshot of what we're doing. And I think if there's anything really to kind of take away from this, it is about collaboration, and our partnerships, and how we can lead and convene partnerships, how we create project pipelines, how we monitor and report on progress around habitat delivery and enhancement, and also kind of promoting through local nature recovery strategies and further outreach. So, it is very much about how we can collaborate and join together. So next slide. So I'm going to start off with what's the problem really, and the next slide on that is a key thing really is, actually there's a significant funding gap here around the natural environment, and for us as a Greater Manchester City region, we face major environmental challenges that threaten the health and prosperity of the city region, and if not managed, this could potentially mean increased quantities of grey infrastructure and decreased quantities of green and blue infrastructure. So for us, the key thing is about how do we kind of turn that on its head and actually start kind of reversing that decline in nature. And then there is a significant funding gap there. A significant amount of additional funding is required to deliver our environmental objectives, and I'm sure across the country similar objectives and funding needs, and deploy those kind of critical local nature-based solutions. Much of it will come from non-public sources. Public and philanthropic capital is insufficient alone to meet the funding needs, and so therefore there's an urgent need to look at and attract new sources of funding, kind of to protect our kind of natural environment, and to deploy existing sources of funding more strategically. Obviously, particularly there's a key role there in terms of LNRS, which Rachel will kind of come on to a bit later, but delivering local nature-based solutions will lead to green jobs, greater well-being, and economic resilience. So next slide, please. So in terms of this, sources of capital and kind of funding out there, obviously there's a lot that has already come through kind of philanthropic funding, whether that's grants, whether that's kind of businesses, kind of charitable kind of donations, etc. But outside the public sector, investment natural capital has traditionally drawn upon those philanthropic sources, so shown to the left of the dotted line, with grants as the main form of investment. So we therefore need to look at how we can support investors and investments, shown to the right of the dotted line, for whom some financial returns are necessary, and which will often require some form of blended, i.e. a combination of funds for risk sharing. And again, that's a really key point to take home here is, we are looking at, kind of more blended finance now. How can we bring together public and private finance to kind of reduce those risks in terms of delivery? Next slide. So what's the opportunity? Well, for us in Greater Manchester, we have a whole, kind of raft of plans and strategies out there. And, that's all underpinned by the Greater Manchester strategy, which was refreshed a couple of years ago. And at that has, a really kind of key segue there in terms of how we can create a greener, cleaner, more prosperous Greater Manchester. And a lot of the work that we've been developing on natural capital has helped to shape the priorities in our 5-year environment plan. And again, as I say, around collaboration, we've got all of these plans and strategies that are shown in that concentric diagram. They all cross over, they all interlink, so we can't do things in isolation. But as part of the 5-year environment plan, we place nature at the heart of that, and along with kind of sustainable consumption and production, renewable energy, carbon, etc. But obviously, nature is at the heart of the Greater Manchester strategy, places for everyone, joint development plan, and new funding opportunities. And obviously, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority has recently published its local nature recovery strategy for consultation. So to be more resilient, Greater Manchester's ecological network needs to be bigger, more joined up, and kind of better join up. And ultimately, what we want to achieve is more measurable improvements in our environment. So environmental net gain, including land, whether that's carbon stored, through our trees and peatland, whether that's water, the quality of our water courses, and the ability of our water environment to deal with climate change and biodiversity. Achieving net gain in new development is an important step towards environmental net gain. And really, there are two enablers to make that happen: engagement, people valuing the environment more and benefiting from it, so the value we derive from it increases. Because if people don't understand what they've got and what the benefits it provides to them, they can't value it, and they won't value it in decision making. But also funding: how do we increase investment, particularly from non-public sources, in our natural environment traditionally funded by public money? So next slide, please. So I'm not going to go into detail on this. There's a lot of detail, and obviously happy to share the slides, but I think the point we're trying to get across here is, it's important to highlight that this takes time in terms of our natural capital journey. This hasn't happened overnight, and there is, kind of need for strong partnerships, robust evidence to build political and stakeholder support. We all need to be on the same page about what we understand, what we've got in terms of our natural assets, what benefits they provide, and the value of those. So I'm not going to go through all these key stages, but I've just highlighted a couple of milestones with the red stars. So, which really are proving to be game changers for us. Firstly, we were selected as the government's urban pioneer back in 2016 to kind of test new tools for natural capital investment. We then kind of had a number of demonstrator projects, including the Ignition project, looking at how we kind of look at, particularly in terms of retrofit, kind of sustainable urban drainage and nature-based solutions in existing urban areas, and the case for that. Developing and securing new resources to trial new approaches. So setting up the GM Environment Fund, which I'll come on to in a minute. Producing the 5-year environment plan, which, kind of we launched at our first mayoral summit, and then the natural capital investment plan. And then we've got the local nature recovery strategy pilot and the subsequent development of the local nature recovery strategy, which has involved extensive consultation engagement with partners and stakeholders. And obviously the launch of the Mayor's Green Spaces Fund has been a real game changer, which again, I'll come on to. Next slide. So I mentioned about, kind of natural capital, and again, understanding what we've got, what it provides in terms of benefits, and what those values are in terms of benefits to society. Because if we don't understand what we've got, what we have in terms of benefits and value, then that isn't going to be considered as part of our decision making, and it doesn't have a value. And therefore, a key priority at the start of the Urban Pioneer project back in 2016 was the development of a set of natural capital accounts and ecosystem services opportunity maps. And you can see here that what we're trying to do is measure the benefits provided by the city region's natural assets to its businesses, public services, and residents. And we've done this so we know what we currently have. We can monitor these over time and seek improvement. And you can just see from this slide that Greater Manchester's natural assets contribute to over £1 billion worth of benefits each year to the economy and society through climate and air quality regulation, physical and mental health, amenity and carbon storage. And the decline in the state of the natural environment will continue to reduce these benefits, increasing pressures elsewhere on budgets for health and social care for flood protection. So, ultimately, what we're saying here is if we don't continue to protect, maintain and enhance our assets, then the value from those assets will decline, and actually in turn will have an impact on other areas elsewhere. So key thing to kind of look at there. Next slide. And then, from an investment point of view, the production of the natural capital investment plan was really pivotal, really, in terms of providing the benchmark in terms of, actually how do we kind of start developing a range of innovative finance models and mechanisms to actually start leveraging other forms of investment. So, this kind of development of innovative finance models, whether that's biodiversity net gain, carbon credits, others, to support natural capital investment was a key focus of this plan. And there are a number of recommendations there. Two key ones were the public sector to be an investment commissioner, so developing a supporting financial environment and business plans for specific investment opportunities, and GMCA and partners, creating some form of investment fund to actually help support that. And that has turned into the Greater Manchester Environment Fund. So what's the solution? Last couple of slides here. Well, the first one is, we've set up the GM Environment Fund as this recommendation from the Natural Capital Investment Plan. It's the first city region-based investment opportunity for nature in the country at the time. And ultimately, what we're trying to do here is have a central funding source for projects, funds and investments that will have a transformational impact, demonstrate value for money and bring benefits to everyone involved. So next slide. So you can see here that, you know, we've got this kind of overview of the kind of mechanism for the GM Environment Fund. And effectively what it is we've set up GM Environment Fund as a charitable vehicle. So it's an arm's length charitable vehicle that's managed by Lancashire Wildlife Trust. Lancashire Wildlife Trust provide technical expertise, a local network and experience in kind of running charitable vehicles for fund deployment. And ultimately, you know, kind of the GM Environment Fund will collate a range of, you know, kind of funds, whether that's non-restricted funds such as public philanthropic sources, but also restricted funds that can be strategically channeled into delivering environmental priorities. So, you know, it's a key kind of area that we're developing. It's still being developed. So next slide, we have an investment strategy that was developed by Finance Earth, working with Lancashire Wildlife Trust, to kind of look at actually kind of identifying those key areas. So in the short term, you know, there's still a need to look at securing and bringing in philanthropic funding or government grants to help kind of, you know, kind of still kind of cover the cost of running the GM Environment Fund, but also at the same time, start looking at developing these innovative investment models, whether or not it's like carbon banking or habitat banking. Next slide. So, you know, I think to finish on really, you know, we've had a lot of success in terms of the GM Environment Fund. You know, it has been able to act as a strategic kind of convener, bringing in, you know, joint partnership bids, whether that's through the Green Recovery Challenge Fund. It's provide a platform for profit organisations to raise funds. But also it's helped to grant, you know, with grant distribution across the whole of Greater Manchester. So it manages the £3 million Green Spaces Fund. It manages the Recycle for Greater Manchester Community Fund. So it's supported a whole range of groups there. But obviously it's also got funding to help start to develop biodiversity net gain and carbon offsetting. Next slide. So the last slide really is, you know, next steps. You know, there's still a lot of collaborative work, as I mentioned right at the start, that's essential to work with stakeholders to sustain and grow community empowerment programs, whether or not that's the Green Spaces Fund or the Recycle for Greater Manchester Fund. And obviously a key thing from our perspective is championing the impact of the Green Spaces Fund for continued commitment in the mayor's kind of manifestos, but also looking at how we can bring in corporate sponsorship in terms of that, and that's starting to happen. But also, how can we further develop those biodiversity net gain and carbon offsetting models? And again, how do we kind of line funds into other areas to maximise the potential for natural environment improvement? So not just looking at siloed, but actually looking at how we can deliver for the wider environment. So that's my kind of whistle-stop tour. Obviously happy to share the slides and everything that's in them because there's a lot to take in, but I thought I'd give you a snapshot of what we've been doing to date and where we've got to, but still a lot of work to do. So thank you very much for your time.